And I think we're live. I want to welcome Troy Fine, who's the Senior Manager Risk Advisory Services for Schneider Downs, to today's session. Welcome, Troy.
Thanks. Glad to be here, David. I was here a couple weeks ago, so it's good to have my own solo this time, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, AJ.
Yeah. Put you at center stage. So why don't we get started? So first of all, you have a fascinating background. You are a trained CPA,
so to speak.
Yeah, so to speak. Well, you're very modest as well. But then you're a trained CPA that have taken the route to become an auditor. And we talked briefly about that last time, but I would love to kind of dive a little deeper into that. Why did you decide to train as a CPA, and how did you got into the auditing business? That would be great.
Yeah. So how I became a CPA. So basically, when I went to college, right? I mean, it's probably a bad reason, but I just thought a CPA would be a good career to make a lot of money. So I went the business route, went the CPA route. It wasn't really a good reason, I don't think. And I always kind of had a knack for math, numbers, doing that kind of stuff. It just intrigued me. So I thought accounting would be a good career for me. So I went down that path, and I wouldn't say I was always into it, if that made sense. I kind of just, like I said, did it probably for the wrong reasons. But I always had a technology background as well. I took coding classes in high school. Like, I didn't want to, this was like 2003, right? I mean, like, technology, cybersecurity, all this stuff, it was there, but it wasn't like in your face growing up and being in school. Like, I didn't get my first cell phone until, I was in high school, right? I didn't have apps and stuff. So, yeah, but I was coding and learning that stuff. And so when I was in college, I decided, I had a CPA, but I don't want to lose technology. So let's do a major that has IT. And I did information systems and accounting, which that makes no sense, right? When you think about it. And there were maybe three people, 2 or 3 of us at all of Ohio State, which I went to college. It's a huge school, right? 50,000 students. And there were 3 of us at the whole school that did those 2 majors, right? So it really didn't make sense, I think, to a lot of people. I'm not even sure it made sense to me. But I was just like, I want to do both. So let's just do this. And actually, my first job out of school was an IT job. Had nothing to do with being a CPA. I did database development work. It was the only job I can get. This was 2008, 2009. Not a good time to be looking for a job out of college. As the housing bubble, it just wasn't a good time. So you took whatever you could get. And I got a job as a developer, helping create databases, doing ETL work, extract, transform, load. Things like that, SQL databases. It was a good job, good learning. And while I was there, I still took my CPA exam on my own. Again, my employer didn't even understand, why are you taking your CPA exam when we're doing an IT job that has nothing to do with being a CPA? And I just did it, paid for it myself and did it. Whatever, a lot of money to study and did it, but I wanted to do it. About 2 years later, I found a job and I learned about this IT audit thing. And I was like, wait, what is this? What is IT audit? And I found out CPA firms were assessing the risk and providing assurance over IT systems. And I thought to myself, well, if there's ever a job that could be a good fit for me, it might be IT audit. So I explored that route, and I took a job at Schneider Downs and started doing IT audit work. With my CPA, and then the rest is history. Now I'm doing SOC 2. So it's kind of a long background, but I guess the theme is, like, I always just kind of did things that really didn't make sense, or it makes sense now, but at the time, I was, wasn't sure where I was going to go, and here's where it led me. So that was just kind of my theme of my life.
It's evident these days that there's a lot of people with cross-functional training. In not just CPA and in an auditor, but you can see that a lot with people that are CPAs that do, for example, they're COOs or marketers that have technical background. It seems like the ability to have that cross functional experience and knowledge really helps. So, for example, you have a developer background essentially, but that means that you're you have the nuts and bolts as well to figure out, when you're talking about some technical aspects of auditing, actually understand this stuff, which is again not trivial. A lot of people don't understand this. That the technical aspect of things almost sips through everything. There's nothing today that's non-technical. We are a knowledge-based economy. These audits always, deal with a lot of zeros and ones too, right? So it's almost you can't escape. So people say, "Oh, I'm not." I don't like computers. I mean, how can you escape computers these days? How can you escape, programming languages and understanding this stuff? And I also see that you are committed. Like, look, you've done the ISC certification, um, the now the CMMC. We're going to talk a bit about that as well. But you're committed. Why did you decide to go through all those certifications after? You obviously have a lot of education already. Why did you decide to pursue additional certifications?
So again, probably not for the right reasons. I just thought having a lot of letters meant I was smart, I guess, right? But actually, how I viewed certifications, and maybe I'm actually not, I don't view them as I view them as learning opportunities, right? So I felt that when I got my CISA, I learned more from actually, like when I take the exams, I actually read the huge study material books because I view it as a learning opportunity. I'm like, there's all this information here. Let's learn it. And what's the best way to learn it? Study for it and make me feel like I'm going to get rewarded at the end for actually reading through it and doing it all. So I do only want to take certifications where I feel like I was learning something. Because again, I was coming in, I didn't have any audit experience, and I had somewhat of an IT background, but I didn't have I never implemented a network before. I never did anything like hands-on security wise, right? So I'm trying to catch up really fast. And my theory is just read and learn as much as you can. And I feel like studying for certifications is one of the best ways to do that if you actually take the time to actually read and study, which I kind of like doing that. So maybe that makes me a little weird. But so that's why I did the CISA. And then the CISP was, again, the same thing. I kind of saw that I was kind of lacking in that security knowledge. And I wanted to be viewed as more of a security expert. Like I didn't want people to think oh, he's just an auditor. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. I wanted at least something to back that up because I feel like being a CPA, I was automatically going to be put in this, bucket or window and say, oh, he doesn't really know security. He's just auditing us, whatever. He doesn't actually know what he's doing. So I wanted something to at least back it up while at the same time I wanted to learn. And I studied, and I remember for the CISP, literally every night for 3 hours, I was going through study material for 3 straight months. I made it a mission, I made it something, and I learned more from that 3-month span than I probably would have ever learned by not doing it, right? So it kind of forces me to learn it. And that's why I do the certifications, because really the first thing is a learning opportunity. Second thing is, let's prove to people that I actually at least know somewhat what I'm talking about a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting. I think you touch upon a key aspect of doing anything, that is whatever you put in, that's what you get out. I think that's true for degrees as well. So, for the sake of the people that, people always want to understand how to get into cybersecurity. In the thing is that most of them don't understand that there are so many different areas within the space. So, for example, you're an auditor that does some specific work around cybersecurity as well. And it's what you don't know, right? Because people are not aware that even this type of job exists, right? Because when you go into school, there's no training specifically for auditor. It's you're either a programmer, web designer, and so on. So, if you don't mind, I know it's kind of a basic question. What does an auditor actually do? And no, I'm serious. This is because somebody comes in and say, okay, maybe the way you describe it, will say, okay, I want to be an auditor. This is something I like to pursue. And then maybe you can kind of describe what was your first audit and how did that go, and how you really got into the hands-on, doing the work. That'd be great.
Yeah. So no, it is a good question. I was just laughing because, there is, I think, a big gap in the government's risk and compliance space in terms of like recruiting people. There's no like major at colleges or universities where it's like, I'm going to major in governance, risk and compliance, and then go do SOC 2 ISO audit. It doesn't exist. And the schools are trying to like teach about it, but they kind of touch on it here, they touch on it there.
Agreed.
They're not really doing a good job. That's why I'm laughing, because we're trying to go through this internally and figure out how do we identify the best students and how do we communicate what this job actually entails. So it's definitely a common question. But at the end of the day, it's really governance, risk, and compliance. Like when we audit, we are auditing controls. It could be any type of control, right? So in our group, I focus on security controls, but we have a lot of people that just do financial risk controls, right? So anything where there's a risk tied to it, you should have controls to mitigate that risk. It could be privacy risk, financial risk, security risk, reputational risk, compliance risk, like anything where you're like, wow, we have a risk here, business continuity risk, like you should have controls to mitigate those risks associated with that. And our job is to go in and audit controls and say, and then say at the end of our audit, here's the risks that are presented by this framework or by this subject matter that we're auditing. Here are the controls they have in place. We got evidence and artifacts to support those controls, and we can comfortably say that they have the right kind of controls to mitigate the risk presented by that subject matter. So at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're doing, and you can replace risk with any kind of risk that you can think of.
Now, why not, so I'll be the devil's advocate. Why not have the company just say, hey, we're secure. We test ourselves. Why do you need an external auditor to do this?
So that you can show to customers that it's been an independent party. I think there's more assurance. Mm-hmm. At least if I'm going to a customer or regulator, usually they're the ones that are looking for that independent third-party audit assessment. And when it's no different than thinking of a financial statement audit, right? If I'm a public company and investors want to invest in me, they want an independent audit of the financial statements so that they can be like, oh, yeah, they have pretty good financials. And look, these numbers that they're showing me, they've been audited by somebody, so it's actually correct. If the company said that themselves, yeah, they probably are going to fudge things, right? Because they have a different incentive, right? So the idea is that you want that third-party assurance to provide and protect the public. Really, really, that's what from any type of risk. Really, that's what.
But don't you basically? I mean, who pays you? I mean, the company pays you, right? So then they hire your services to get audited. So isn't it almost
conflict of interest?
Yeah. I mean, because if you're doing a really bad job and really kill them on the audit, the chances are you're not going to get invited again. No.
Well, if you remember the whole Enron scandal, right? I don't think the audit firm, and I won't name the audit firm, but I'm sure we all can remember it. I don't know if they ever actually got charged, but if you actually ever read through it, they actually were found deleting evidence, doing things to hide stuff from the regulators once they started coming in because they wanted to hide that they knew stuff, but they didn't actually report it for whatever reason, right? So you're right. There's always going to be an inherent conflict of interest, and that's where auditors have to use their best judgment and really be okay with saying, here's our finding, and if this causes you not to use us anymore going forward, yeah, you got to be comfortable. It's hard to do. It's probably one of the hardest parts of my job, right? Because I never want to tell a customer that, hey, you're getting a bad audit report, you're getting a qualified opinion. But at the same time, we have to maintain that integrity. And if we lose our integrity, then I think we lose the whole industry. So it's not an easy thing. Ethics is a big thing in the accounting world, and there's problems with it all the time. So you really have to try to maintain your objectivity while also providing good service so they keep using you. It's a very hard balance if you want the honest truth.
Yeah, no, and I do want the honest truth. I mean, that's why we're here for, right? And we want to uncover, that's why I asked the tough questions. Did you ever come across situations where you don't necessarily, I mean, there's some gray area where, you're being asked to do something that, because there's a lot of gray areas, even in this particular business, right? So, it's almost like statistics, what, graphs, you can show any way you want it, right? So, um, did you come across situations where it was a kind of fine line between what the customer wanted and what your ethics told you to do?
I don't know if I've ever had a situation like where it was like where I was like, wow, I really feel like my ethics are being questioned here. Um, I mean, I'd really try to kind of like figure that out early on, like even as part of the prospecting process. Um, if I see a client that I feel like they're just going to want to push us around, they're not going to want to do things, or they're going to want to like kind of do some, I just get a bad feeling from them. Sometimes I just like don't even want to bid on the work, right? But that's not always easy to figure out. But once you do this long enough, you can kind of start to figure out those customers. But I wouldn't say I've had a horrible situation. I mean, fortunately for me, I'm dealing with pretty good, clients out there. But there have been times where we've had to kind of like stand our ground, and they didn't like what we had to say, and they have left. But you just got to be okay with that, I think, in the industry, and expect that to happen, because if they're going to do that to you, they're probably going to go do it to somebody else too. And if somebody else wants to compromise their own integrity, um, that's their risk to take. But like I said, it's a hard balance, but we try to mitigate that risk early on as part of accepting the client. Like, understand what's the integrity of their leadership, what's their governance structure, all that. We actually have to fill out documentation. There's actually like a whole list of questions we're supposed to ask before accepting the work. And part of it is all this stuff like, are we independent? Do we feel management has the proper integrity? All that fun stuff. So we're supposed to be analyzing that risk before taking on the client, actually.
And who audits you? Like, is there like somebody who audits, like an auditor of auditors?
There is. So it depends on the framework you're being audited against, right? So it's for the AICPA, and when I say framework, I mean, I'm just speaking security framework. But when I say CPA firm, this kind of applies to any attestation work that we perform, right? So a SOC 2 report is actually, or a SOC 2 examination is actually an attestation examination, very similar to like a financial statement audit, right? So all of our attestation work that we perform and provide an opinion on the financial statements or the security SOC 2 report on the security risk, that all has to actually be peer reviewed. I think it's every 3 years. And there's a whole like peer review program that the AICPA has out there. So if you're a member of the AICPA and you want to perform attestation engagements, you have to be a member of the AICPA. There's a whole peer review process where we have peers, or we say peers, but it's a group of CPAs from another firm. They come in and actually audit your work and make sure that you have a proper quality management system in place. And they have their own checklist that they're actually following that's geared toward the attestation standards that we have to follow. And if they find that we're not doing something we're supposed to, we could actually get dinged, and then there's a public report. You could actually go to the AICPA website and look up these reports, these peer review reports that are done on firms. You can just look up a firm and go look it up and see what the results were. So it's publicly available to anybody. And then also, if you're auditing public companies, doing a financial statement on a public company, PCAOB, the public, I'm not even going to say, I don't remember what it stands for, but it's Accounting Oversight Board, Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, and they really take a hard line on that stuff, right? They'll go in and they will say, who are all the public clients that you audited? And they look at everything like they're doing the audit again, and they're pretty strict, a lot more strict than the AICPA is. So public companies, we have a big magnifying glass on us when we audit public companies.
So that's really interesting. I don't know if any, people that are watching have really most of them actually understand this stuff. There's actually a whole process of getting getting audited as an audit firm. So tell me, Troy, what was your first experience? So do you remember your first audit? What was the kind of the framework you were using?
Gosh, it was terrible. I remember my first SOC too that we did. I like remember where I was. I remember, but you don't know how bad it is until 10 years later. You know that, right? Like at the time, I thought I did an amazing job probably, but I look back 10 years and I'm like, oh, that was terrible. So yeah, at the time, it was cool. It was awesome, and we were excited about doing our first SOC 2 report and getting into this space. We saw it as a big opportunity for our firm, and it has been a great opportunity. But the actual quality of the audit, I would say, was very subpar. I mean, they're still a client of ours, actually, and it's changed a lot, the audit. I'll be honest, I don't know if they know we were their first one. I can't remember if we told them, but maybe I should tell them after this. But it wasn't good. I did not do a good job. I mean,
you're spilling the beans live, Troy. So does that mean that you should not be hiring a junior auditor, or is it just how so happened to be, or is that the framework specifically what you did was not great?
I don't think it was because I was a junior auditor. I think it was just because it was a new space to us almost 10 years ago. Like we had never done it, so we were trying to figure out the ropes, kind of building the plane as we were flying it, so to speak. Matt and we had a team of probably only 5 to 10 people doing these audits. Now we have probably a team of 20 to 30. Wow. So we have a whole training program in place. When someone comes on board, we have a good framework to train people. And when we go do an audit, we're the junior personnel, they're working with a more experienced person that's done this before, right? So we have a lot more of a streamlined process to identify risk, identify scope, to kind of avoid the mistakes that I made early on, or we made early on when we started doing these. So I encourage anybody, start, don't get discouraged after you do a first of anything, right? It's never good. You just have to understand that the only way you can get better is by making mistakes. And if you want to forge your own path, kind of like I did, you might not know you're making mistakes, but it's a harder path to go down when there's nobody there kind of guiding you all the time. But you won't know you made mistakes till 10 years later. But yeah, don't get discouraged when you first start off in any cybersecurity job, especially GRC. It's a very subjective field, right? So something you do when someone's reviewing your work, 3 other people might look at it differently. So you just have to understand that there's no right answer, and there's probably not even a wrong answer most of the time. It all comes down to judgment, and judgment only comes with experience. So your judgment will get better with anything you do as you keep going, but don't get discouraged. I did a terrible job in my first audit. I'm just telling you.
And listen, since it was 10 years ago, I'm sure there's some aging clause that it doesn't matter now.
I think they can only go back 7 years maybe. So yeah, that one's gone. That one's done for. I don't even think we have it anymore. I'm gonna keep it for 7 years. So you're right, it's gone.
So Troy, you do a bunch of different kinds of audits. From SOC 2 to, I guess now you do CMMC, readiness and so on. Is there one that you particularly like that you say, oh yes, this is the great framework that I kind of enjoy doing, and then there's one that you kind of walk in knowing that, oh, it's something I have to do, but not necessarily enjoy it? And I know it's can be totally subjective. But it's okay.
I guess I do mostly SOC 2 right now, so that's kind of my answer. That's kind of my favorite one. I don't want to say I don't like the other ones. I'm still figuring out CMMC. That's a very different type of framework than SOC 2. CMMC is going to be very, very specific, very prescriptive on how you have to do things. Same with ISO is pretty prescriptive. Pretty much all the frameworks are pretty prescriptive. PCI, HITRUST, they all have things pretty much laid out, where SOC 2, as we kind of talked about in our other call, is kind of subjective in nature. You can kind of use your own types of controls. So I do like working on SOC 2 mainly for that reason, is that you can kind of really tailor the audit and the controls to the type of risk you're trying to audit against based on how the client is doing it. They don't have to necessarily follow a certain way of doing a control if it doesn't make sense. Where the other ones, they kind of become like, I don't want to say, a necessary evil, but people just end up, saying like, oh, here's another compliance audit here. We have to do this audit because the government said we have to do this, or, HITRUST, this healthcare says we have to be with HITRUST with all these different controls. And I think that's when people get a lot of audit fatigue as a client and as an auditor, right? There's no freedom to kind of be creative. Auditors aren't supposed to be creative, I guess, but SOC 2 allows you to have that freedom to create and be, use a lot of different types of controls to meet things. Whereas the other ones, kind of inhibit that creativity, so to speak. So SOC 2 is my favorite for that reason, but, in 10 years, I guess that could change, once I start doing more of these other ones.
It's really amazing you use the word creativity, to describe an audit. It's like it's almost like an oxymoron a little bit, because the frameworks, as you mentioned, are very descriptive. So you carved a really interesting niche to work with a lot of like early stage companies and so on that requires SOC 2, and you mentioned that you really enjoy doing that. Why is SOC 2 specifically important for these like early stage companies? And then let's talk a bit about the CMMC readiness and how that's shaping up to be. You mentioned it's very different, and I think people would be interested to hear a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. So why is SOC 2 important for SaaS companies? I think that was your first part of your question. Because a lot of SaaS companies, they want to grow fast, they want to scale fast. They got to show, their investors, and they have to bring on clients fast, right? Well, the one thing you don't want to do is have compliance or security slow that growth down potentially, right? Because when you start to get into the bigger enterprise customers, even some of the mid-sized customers, if you're a SaaS company, it's kind of like becoming the gold standard. The rite of passage is to have a independent CPA firm perform a SOC 2 audit. It's just kind of the way it's going. And these big enterprise customers, they're not really going to take the time to understand what all their SaaS vendors are doing. They kind of just have a blanket statement. You need to have SOC 2. We give you data. It's a cloud platform. You have to have SOC 2. So you want to prioritize this early in your startup stage. When you can be agile, you can make changes quickly. You want to do it early, and it could take time. If somebody's requiring a type 2, a type 2 has got to cover a period of time, right? And most of the time they want it to cover 6 months. They might accept lower, they might accept less of a time period, but chances are they want it to cover 6 months. So if it's May 1st and you have a company coming to you to say, I need a type 2 audit, I want you to have a type 2 audit, it's May 1st. And you're like, wait a second, it's going to take, I need 6 months to pass for me to even have an auditor come in. Well, now I'm already at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And now they have to audit my controls for 6 months. What kind of controls do I have to have in place? You don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to be scrambling and trying to figure that out. You want to get ahead of the game. So when the enterprise customer comes to you, here you go. This is our SOC 2 report, right? You've already have a leg up on your competitors, probably. So you don't want to be caught scrambling. So that's why I think it's important.
And is any other companies even that, is there a non-SaaS companies out there that, there's very few. I think everything is basically now cloud-based. I don't know if there's any startup company or like early stage company that say, okay, let's create our own, data center and host it all in-house. You're laughing, but I think that's true, right? So everything is becoming, and even companies themselves, right? They're moving everything to the cloud. It seems like they're they still do hybrid where it's like, half in some of it is private cloud and so on, but it's mostly, cloud services. So no, tell me, you've done the CMC certifications. Where do you see that now? I mean, it's still kind of early stage, right? It kind of maybe, I don't know if you know the background of the inception, why even CMC even started and why it is even implemented, and then talk to me a bit about the differences of that and some of the other frameworks. That if you can share, that'd be great.
Yeah, I will caveat, I am not a government expert in the auditing space. So anybody watching this, I'm going to be honest, I actually have a lot of imposter syndrome when it comes to CMMC. I've been doing stuff for 10 years, but like this is a whole new space to me. I see people talking about it, and this stuff is just going over my head. And there are a lot of experts out there, so I'm in like kind of like the last 6 months have been eye opening to me on what I didn't know, which was a good and bad thing. But I am having major imposter syndrome with this. But I do know the basics now to talk enough about it.
And by the way, I actually love that. And the reason being, you're probably going to explain it in such a way that it's going to be clear to people that are just never even heard the term, and because you're not an expert, so you're going to explain it in a more kind of a simplified manner. So maybe what does that mean to you? In If you kind of know the background a little bit about like why even in the inception of this, and because it
Mhm.
seems like it is, and I think you're right about starting to understand it and starting to figure things out, because it looks like it's gaining some traction. And how it is. Maybe CMMC we're going to have, children is going to be like a CMMC like for public for private sector as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely going to balloon into a lot more. I just think a lot more is probably 5 years away, to my guess. But basically, um, how the history of CMMC worked is, um, if you've ever heard of NIST 800-171, basically in 2016, 2017, and there were, by the way, there were rules before 2017, but this is where that stuff kind of goes over my head, and I don't know much about the history before, so I don't want to get into that. But in about 2016 or 2017, there was this regulation, I'll call it, that came out called DFARS 7012. There's other numbers in front of 7012. I just 254 or something. But the key term is, if you say DFAR 7012, everybody knows what you're talking about. In 7012, it pretty much said that when the DoD, when the Department of Defense brings on a new supplier, they now have to put a clause into a 7012 clause into their contract with the suppliers. What 7012 says is, at a high level, is that you need to have safeguards and controls in place to meet NIST 800-171 controls. 800-171 is a NIST framework, if you're familiar with it. It's for controlled unclassified information. So if you're getting controlled unclassified information from the Department of Defense or another government entity, and they have this clause in your contract, you have to meet 171. There's 110 controls you have to meet for 171. Everybody signed it, right, in 2017. Oh, yeah, we'll do it. Okay, let's sign the contract. Whatever. We just want the work. Well, fast forward to 2019 and 2020, all of a sudden, you got nation states that are taking, an F-35 with the same parts and the same pieces and doing it and creating it really quickly after we just did it. Well, how did that happen? So basically, the DoD, I think, came to think that, okay, we have all these suppliers. There's data leaks, that happened where these nation states, whether it was internal people working at these companies and sending data out, whatever the case may be, I don't know, but they got that data somehow. And the DoD said, we got to put a stop to this. And they said, but we have 171, right? But guess what? You didn't actually have anybody go in and audit it or try to enforce it. So now that's where CMMC came into play. They needed to put a enforceable means where they could say to people, when you renew your contract, you have to be in compliance with CMMC. And what does that mean? That means you have to have a certified third-party organization come in and audit you against the CMMC controls, which guess what? They're based off of 171 pretty much. So it was a layer on top of 171 to give it teeth, because they said people aren't actually doing this, and they ignored it for 3 or 4 years or however long. So that's kind of how we got to this point, and they're still in the pilot stages of all this, because basically how the government works is you can't like retroactively go do this, right? So if I signed a contract as a supplier in 2020 and it only had the DFAR 7012 clause in it, they can't retroactively go say, okay, now you have to be CMMC all of a sudden. There has to be like a renewal come up, or it has to be rebid or something. So CMMC can only be put onto a contract for new work or work that has to be rebid, or the terms have to be renewed or something like that, if that makes sense. So CMMC is going to be a long path, a long journey. And we'll get there, but I think it's farther away than people might think. So hopefully that kind of explained where CMMC kind of came from.
Listen, Troy, I think you've done an amazing job. This is like the time I'll tell that this conversation is completely unscripted. So you did not know that I'm going to ask you this CMMC question. And you were very modest about it, but I love the answer because it really makes total sense. Like you described the kind of the evolution of how this whole thing started. And then, so like I said, you've done a phenomenal job. Thank you. This is really great. So now, you know, there's CMMC, there's so many others out there. You do specifically SOC 2. You know, where is this whole compliance going? Because I've heard, you know, they're going to start doing compliance around diversity, around, you know, green energy. I mean, it just almost seems like an endless. And I don't mind regulations as, you know, as a citizen and so on. I think it's great. I think there's some measures to it, but doesn't it inhibit business? I mean, you know, it costs a lot to be compliant all the time in all the different aspects. And I don't know, you're laughing, but I don't know. Tell me what your thoughts are as an auditor. Maybe you're biased about this.
Well, I think it's a great segue from CMMC, because there's a big debate out there. I mean, the defense industrial base, you know, I'll just continue on CMMC because this is a perfect question for that.
Yep.
But the defense industrial base has, they're claiming around 300,000 suppliers that support the Department of Defense. Some of these are very small manufacturers, right? A lot of them are manufacturers. So they're making one part that goes into like an F-35, right? So the drawings they get, all the stuff they get, that's considered CUI. So they have to protect that controlled unclassified information. And they have to now implement 110, 130 controls in CMMC. And they have one IT person that's doing all this, right? And this is like, if you ever look at 171, I mean, it could easily cost 6 figures to implement these controls, easily. I mean, even for a small manufacturer that has 10 employees with an outsourced IT person, maybe. So there is a lot of debate around, you're now going to create, we have 171, you created CMMC. Think about all the costs that's going to implementing these controls. Probably going to have to hire people to perform these controls. I'm probably going to have to purchase a lot of security tools to help implement these controls. I have to pay an assessor to come in and do the audit. I have to spend time with the assessor doing the audit. So you can see how these costs can easily rack up for a small manufacturer that really has no control over what's happening. So it could, I mean, there's a lot of debate saying, is the DoD really going to force this? And here's the best part about CMMC, it's all or nothing. If you fail one control, you don't get certified. Wow. So is the DoD just gonna like get rid of their supply chain? That's not good for national defense, right? So yeah, something's got to give, I guess is what I'm saying. And there's a big debate out there about this.
But it almost sounds like it's going to be a whole new industry. It's like, because, you know, you're talking about the auditing, the mitigation, the consult. I mean, there's so many different areas. And then now maybe there's an opportunity for companies to come out there and say, hey, you know, we can take it, whatever results are, and we can fix them. Maybe outsource some of them. And I don't know what the controls are specifically, but you take that mom and pop shop and makes widgets, and we have CMMC readiness in a box. where we come in and we go make you go through that process. And I find if you let the market forces leave, kind of be on their own, eventually, as you mentioned, something was going to give, and it will solve itself. I mean, you're right. They're not gonna get rid of 100,000 non-compliant vendors.
Right. That's bad for national security, right? So, and they're trying to go from 0 to 100. Right? I mean, y'all know that doesn't work, right? So I just think it's government. We have to kind of let it play itself out, and it will come back to the middle. But as with everything in government, it just takes time for the right things to happen, for the right people to get involved, the right bad things to happen again. So it'll happen. It's just nobody knows when. And I think think about if you're a small manufacturer trying to figure this out. Now I have this huge unknown in front of me. What do I do? Like, I can imagine that would be a very stressful thing for a lot of people to be dealing with as a business owner. So
right.
I don't have a good answer either on how to deal with it right now.
Listen, this was a really great conversation. We're running out the kind of the top of the time allotted for this, but I love the honesty and kind of the straightforwardness of your approach and how you answer these questions, because it's really it's really refreshing. I love that. What's the best way for people to reach you if they want to know more and get some insight to some of the other auditing, and maybe consult with you on SOC 2?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is probably going to be the best place to find me. Or you can just, honestly, I'll give my email away. I don't mind. I get enough, but whatever. Let's get more emails if people want to talk. So you could also email me at my email address is just tfine@schneiderdowns.com. But again, LinkedIn is probably going to be the best place to find me.
That's fantastic, and maybe we should do this again. We pick kind of the additional topics that are on SOC 2, CMMC. I mean, it seems like there's almost endless type of regulatory frameworks that are coming down into play. And you're probably one of the best people to ask. So if ever come across a new framework or want to know more, we'll do another session like this as well. I think it was phenomenal.
Yeah, we're actually we're pretty close to be doing like PCI work soon. So we just became a QSA, and I'm taking the training in mid-June. So that could be a whole nother topic as well on PCI and how that works. Once I start diving into that, another imposter syndrome 6 months from me. So, but that's the way security works, right? You just kind of got to accept it, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And you learn, it's on the job training. You learn, and as long as you're willing to say that I don't know, and be upfront with it and uncover that. So I think that's the way to do it. So again, Troy, thank you very much for taking part. It's been a really pleasure having you, and looking forward to seeing you hopefully the next time, and hopefully maybe in New York. I know Pittsburgh is not that far away. Things are starting to open
Definitely.
up. Okay, thanks all for joining, and thanks all for joining me and today, and looking forward to seeing you in the next event, which is actually tomorrow. Take care, all. Talk to you soon.